February 11, 2016. Johannesburg, South Africa. Two white middle-aged men are having a meeting at the Brazilian coffee shop, which is located in Sandton, a very wealthy suburb north of Johannesburg. The two men are said to be regular customers at this coffee shop, and that they were well known by the staff members. At first, the men were having a chat in English, and then as the conversation goes on, they switch over to Spanish, initially talking about health issues, including back pains, that one of them was suffering from. The two men would then move on to discuss cars, work, the beach, and the weather, specifically pointing out how the sun's effect is just like in Cuba, an island country which is located in the Caribbean. The two then exchange words about whether to eat breakfast or lunch, or to simply sip on some coffee instead. A few minutes later, the mood changes. The two men switch to more pressing matters. They start by talking about someone named Jabin, who they describe as the biggest warrior of them all. They discuss how a lady named Griselda was murdered in the Colombian city of Medellin. How someone named Amado stole 12 from someone named Pablo. Decoding the duo's conversation, it appears that Jabin was the nickname of Wilbur Olirio Varela Fajardo, a high-ranking member of the Colombian North Valley cartel that pushed multiple tons of cocaine into Europe and the United States. Jabin was known as the leader of a gang of hitmen, and he was murdered in Venezuela in January 2008. The name Griselda is a reference to the infamous Griselda Blanco, a female cocaine drug lord who was a high-ranking member of the Colombian Medellin cartel. She was murdered in September 2012 after being shot 2 times in the head. Amado stealing 12 from Pablo refers to the Mexican drug lord Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who was accused of stealing 12 tons of cocaine from Pablo Escobar, the biggest drug dealer in history. Both Amado and Pablo were shot and killed in the 1990s. So who exactly were the two men seeming to casually discuss some of the world's most dangerous cocaine traffickers on a first-name basis? Well, one was a man named Joshua Baker, an undercover special agent who worked at the United States Drug Enforcement Agency, aka the DEA. The DEA is a law enforcement organization that was created to take down the most feared and notorious drug lords in the world. They were the ones who shot and killed Pablo Escobar and took down his multi-billion-dollar cocaine empire. Now, the other individual who was sitting with Agent Joshua Baker at the coffee shop was this man right here. Nelson Pablo-Garrido. At that moment, the DEA, FBI, and the CIA had been hunting for Garrido for over 20 years, after he fled the United States with over 100 million rands cash, which he stole from the Cali cartel, a cocaine trafficking organization from Colombia.
So for me to understand, in the power structure of Medellin, where do you fit in the power structure?
Just you're fucking curious, man, eh? Just leave it like that. Let's not talk about those things.
For about 2 decades, one of the world's most notorious drug lords, Nelson Pablo-Garrido, called South Africa home. The United States suspects him of running an international multi-billion rand cocaine empire from his luxurious mansion in Hyde Park, Johannesburg. Garrido's former associates described him as a Cuban Secret Service agent who had a relationship and worked closely with Pablo Escobar. He first arrived in South Africa in 1997, 4 years after Pablo was shot and killed by the DEA. He had fled the United States after stealing over 100 million rands cash from the California Cali cartel. This money was given to Garrido by the cartel so that he can buy a Russian military submarine, which was supposed to be used to distribute large quantities of cocaine to the west coast of the United States. However, Garrido had other plans. After receiving the money, which was $10 million or 180 million rands cash in plastic bags, Garrido ditched the cartel and bought a plane ticket to Amsterdam. When he arrived in Amsterdam, he paid one of his friends 100,000 rands to go away on holiday, so that he could stay at his house for a week. At that time, the DEA had been investigating Garrido for quite a while, and they had knowledge that he was working with the Colombian Cali cartel as a drug smuggler. The DEA also had knowledge that he was planning to buy a Russian military submarine to move cocaine across America. Just a few days after he arrived in Amsterdam, Garrido got a call from one of the high-ranking members of the Colombian Cali cartel. The cartel told Garrido to bring back the money he stole, and they warned him that they knew where he was, and also where his family stayed, in the United States. Now, it was at that point that Garrido decided to buy a fake passport, change his identity, and he bought a one-way ticket to the city of Johannesburg, arriving in January 1997. Upon arriving in South Africa, Garrido bought a multi-million rand mansion in Hyde Park, one of the wealthiest suburbs in South Africa. This suburb is also where most South African politicians stay, including the president of the EFF, Julius Malema, and also the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, just to name a few. Whilst in Johannesburg, Garrido became close to three individuals. Wingate Pierce, who was an importer and exporter in the clothing trade, Wingate's business partner, Adriano Mazzotti, and also the infamous Glenn Agliotti, a convicted drug lord. Garrido never introduced himself to these men with his real name, which was Nelson Pablo-Garrido. Instead, he told them that his name was Antonio Lamas, a Mexican businessman who sold aeroplane parts. According to reports, the association between these four men was most visible in their regular lunches at the Brazilian coffee shop in Sandton. These meetings were so regular that the group was known as the Coffee Shop Set. From these lunches, the Mail and Guardian claimed that 3 illegal businesses were started. A close corporation company called Trade First N95, and also 2 Sandton clothing stores called Fubu Collection and DKNY. These 2 clothing stores were allegedly used to smuggle large quantities of cocaine in and around South Africa in the late 90s. It's alleged that bags of imported second-hand clothing were brought to a bonded warehouse, which is a government-licensed facility, where in-transit clothes are stored pending re-export. It was in that warehouse where Garrido would identify certain bags to be removed illegally. These bags were said to be containing huge quantities of cocaine, which was brought from abroad, specifically from South America. It's alleged that Ben Agliotti's role in this was to arrange police protection through a man named Jackie Celebi. Now, at that time Jackie Celebi was the National Police Commissioner, which is the highest status within the South African Police Service, behind the Minister of Police. Celebi had been a trusted associate of then-President Thabo Mbeki, such that he became the first African to be appointed as the president of Interpol, which is basically an organization that was created to fight crime all over the world. Aside from all of this, Celebi was also working for convicted drug dealer Glenn Agliotti. Court papers revealed that Celebi would receive cash in brown bags, which came from Agliotti. It is said that Celebi and Agliotti used to meet almost daily at the infamous Brazilian coffee shop in Sandton. Among those sharing their table was none other than the legend himself, Garrido. It is alleged that Celebi would take police dockets and pass them down to Agliotti, and then Agliotti would share the dockets with Garrido. It was only a decade later in 2010 that the South African police would find out what was really going on, and Celebi was arrested and found guilty of accepting more than 1.2 million rands in dodgy payments from Glenn Agliotti. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, however he only served 229 days before being released on medical parole. Celebi's arrest only came about because Agliotti turned state witness in his trial, and he testified against his former friend. However, this is a story for another time. By 2002, 5 years after his arrival, Garrido had settled down in South Africa, and he called it home. He would find himself a 23-year-old girlfriend, and they had a child together. He also bought another multi-million rand mansion in Sandhurst, Johannesburg, and also a ton of luxurious cars. However, what he did not know was that the United States was investigating him, and they were on his trail, hard.
Tonight on America's Most Wanted.
Marshals recently received this picture of Nelson Yester. Investigators believe Yester has a British passport bearing the name Hector Santana.
In January 2002, a show which was called America's Most Wanted Criminals would air on South African TV stations. America's Most Wanted Criminals was basically a television show which showcased the most dangerous and wanted fugitives in real time. And in that January 2002 episode, the focus was on Garrido. A South African local who was watching the show recognized Garrido, but he identified him as Antonio Lamas, his fake name that he uses in South Africa. The local would later report this to the South African Police Service, and also the Hawks. On the 24th of April 2002, just 3 months later, Garrido's Hyde Park mansion was raided by the SAPS in an undercover operation. In this operation, the South African police was working together with Interpol, the DEA, and also the United States Immigration Service. According to reports, Interpol had a 5-year-old arrest warrant for 43-year-old Garrido. They claimed that Garrido was a member of a criminal organization that supervised and controlled the shipment and delivery of kilograms upon kilograms of pure cocaine. Interpol also claimed that he would launder the money he received from the sales through fake businesses. During the raid at his house, police seized a ton of things as evidence, including 2 luxury cars worth over 1 million rands, and also 325,000 rands, cash. The police also found more than 20 fake passports, under several different fake names, from Mexico, Venezuela, and also Cuba. One of these passports had Garrido's picture, but Wingate's Pierce's personal details. Yester Garrido would be arrested by the SAPS, and he was held at the Notorious Central Prison, for safety reasons. As all of this was happening, it would be revealed that the United States had signed an extradition treaty with South Africa in 2001, a year before, to arrest Garrido and bring him back to the US. On the 14th of May, about 3 weeks after he was arrested, Garrido would appear at the Randburg Regional Court. It is said that more than 50 heavily armed police officers were stationed inside and outside the court to help secure the area. Other than the SAPS, the DEA, FBI, and the CIA were present in the court. During the court process, the DEA revealed that Garrido had been a fugitive from the United States for at least 12 years on drug trafficking charges. Court papers also revealed that Garrido had in the past been convicted of pretending to be an American citizen, as well as being indicted on charges of being part of a group of individuals involved in importing cocaine into America and transporting it by submarine, helicopter, and aircraft to various other countries. The DEA also accused Garrido of negotiating for the purchase of a Russian military submarine for the Colombian Cali cartel, who intended to use it to transport cocaine to the west coast of America and Canada. The court further claimed that Garrido allegedly used 25 different names in the past years and held a British passport in the name of Hector Santana. With all these claims in hand, attempts would be made by law enforcement to try and extradite Garrido back to the United States. However, he retained the services of senior advocate Lawrence Hodes, who was also Glenn Agliotti's lawyer, and would later defend him on a murder charge. In court, Advocate Hodes opposed the extradition. He would argue that the United States prosecutors exaggerated the amount of cocaine linked to Garrido and his drug-dealing friends, and he also pointed that a state witness had taken back his testimony. The South African Supreme Court of Appeal ruled that Garrido be detained pending a decision. And surprisingly, in late 2006, after being in prison for over a year, he was released from prison, pending a new extradition application. 5 years later, the South African Police Service would be on Garrido's trail again. And this time, it was for a very serious charge.
Packets. That is, each one of these weighs 1 kg. And then in terms of the estimated street value of this is 720 million rands.
Found at the bottom of a 30-level vessel, the container wasn't for South African use or consumption. It was to be offloaded in India and would have gone via Singapore. The cargo was loaded in Brazil. The success of this interception has been a team effort between Interpol and the Hawks, together with various stakeholders.
We have been working on this matter for the past 12 days. So since the 27th of December 2018, we have been working on this matter. This work is undertaken with the assistance of our counterpart Interpol, both locally and abroad.
No arrests were made and the investigation continues. A sample of the contained cocaine will be kept for sampling and the investigation, but the remainder will be destroyed. Ivo Poti, SABC News, Port Elizabeth.
On the 11th of August 2010, in the small town of Port Elizabeth, in the Eastern Cape Province, the South African police received a tip-off that huge quantities of illegal drugs were being delivered at the port of Nur, and they were stored in a container. Through a joint operation, the Hawks, customs officials, and foreign law enforcement agencies tracked the container to a ship that had traveled from South America. The ship was coming from the city of Assumption, in Paraguay, and it was heading to Zimbabwe. The container looked like a petrol tank, but had construction-type pillars holding it together. Inside the container, police found 22,000 liters of used cooking oil. Inside the pillars, however, the police found at least 250 kilograms of pure white cocaine. Police couldn't believe what they had found, and they drained the oil from the tanker to ensure there were no more pillars holding drugs inside.
Hawks, together with other stakeholders, have seized a large amount of cocaine this morning at the Ngqura port here in Port Elizabeth. But with us, we have the head of Hawks who's going to tell us a bit more in terms of the cocaine that was seized. I understand it was about 706 kgs, but in terms of how much it amounts to, how it was packaged, and how you managed to actually intercept this vessel.
We had the idea that there will be a vessel that will be coming, and that vessel will be carrying cocaine. It was not destined for South African consumption. It was en route to India. It has to pass South African waters, and then it has to go to Singapore before it goes to its final destination. The street value of the cocaine that has been seized is approximately 720 million rands.
And then, Mr. Libya, in terms of the seriousness of this crime, obviously it seems like a planned crime. It's gone through a number of countries as well. In terms of the work that was done, the stakeholders that you worked with, and also what will happen now to the seized contents?
This is a serious offense. It is generally what is called transnational organized crime, because it is committed across various borders of different countries. So we work jointly with other law enforcement organizations, the first one being Interpol. So Interpol from these various countries, we work together in ensuring that we go to the bottom of who are the perpetrators. The consignment that we have seized is going to be evaluated by our scientists. The forensic science laboratory is going to evaluate this, and after that evaluation they will produce the reports in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, so that you don't necessarily have to keep the consignment. You can rely on the sample as well as the report. So the rest of the consignment we are going to destroy, so that under no circumstance may it ever come to reach any of the innocent people.
Not even a week after this drug bust, there was immediately some dispute about the quantity of drugs actually seized, with some claiming that the full shipment was 250 kilograms, but only 166 kilograms were booked in by police as evidence. According to media reports, there was also a break-in at the police laboratory in Port Elizabeth, apparently targeting the cocaine hull in an attempt to steal the drugs back after they had been confiscated. 5 men, including a police constable, were arrested. 2 months after the Port Elizabeth drug bust, a man named Chris Courembis was shot and killed outside a wedding venue in Johannesburg in what appeared to be a hit. At the time, there were rumors going around that Chris was the one who gave police the tip-off and also orchestrated the PE bust so he could recover part of the cocaine for himself. Mr. Cocaine, as he was known in the streets, was taken out by 2 men on the back of a motorcycle, clutching an AK-47 and a 9mm pistol. 12 shots were fired, 2 hitting Courembis in the head, and the rest striking his luxury car. At the time of his death, Courembis was about to get into his Porsche Cayenne at around 7:30 p.m., having just been best man at a wedding at the Cradle restaurant in Muldersdrift. The gunman made off with his expensive Rolex watch and a moon bag he was wearing, containing 10,000 rands. According to eyewitnesses, Courembis's murder appeared to have been a premeditated and a professional hit. Courembis was said to be an intriguing character who kept questionable company. Many of his close friends were also friends with South African convict Radovan Krecher. He moved in drug-dealing circles and was known particularly amongst those with links to South American cartels. Despite his low profile locally, Courembis led a very lavish and ostentatious lifestyle. He owned a 5-star villa in Thailand, a nightclub in Brazil, and numerous upmarket properties. He owned multi-million rand properties in Fresnay, on the Atlantic seaboard in Cape Town, in Hyde Park, and also in Bryanston, Johannesburg. His home in Bryanston was in the lavish Savoy estate, and his neighbor was convicted drug dealer, Glenn Agliotti. On the day after his death, Agliotti tweeted, "Lost a dear friend in a shooting yesterday at a wedding. Say a prayer for Chris." According to reports, Courembis had kept a low profile following the massive Port Elizabeth drug bust, living a quiet existence in Spain. The only reason he returned to South Africa was to attend his best friend's wedding, where he was shot and killed at. Crucially, the final text messages police found on Courembis's phone highlighted another friendship that firmly planted him in the criminal underworld. The last messages he sent were to Yester Garrido. In those messages, Courembis confirmed he was on his way to Garrido's Morningside house, where Garrido and his Italian girlfriend were hosting a party to celebrate the birth of their first child. In March 2011, nearly a decade after his first arrest, Yester Garrido was taken into police custody, again. This time, the police alleged that he was also involved in the massive Port Elizabeth drug bust, which occurred a year prior. The authorities carried out a simultaneous transnational raid, involving the SAP's Organized Crime Unit, and also the Brazil Federal Police, in Sao Paulo. During the raid on Garrido's Hyde Park home, police reportedly found a Smith & Wesson revolver, and the gun was registered in Courembis's name. Garrido would also face an additional charge for possession of this weapon. The Mail and Guardian reported that, although there was no evidence linking Garrido to Courembis's murder, the police were convinced that the two cases were linked. A few days after his arrest, Garrido was released on a 600,000 rands bail by the Motherwell Court in Port Elizabeth, and the case against him was utterly bungled. At one stage, the charges against him were even withdrawn, because there was no one who was available to translate Brazilian police documents from Portuguese into English. It would later be discovered that the prosecutors who were involved in Garrido's case were paid at least 700,000 rands to stop the case in its tracks. And soon after that, it disappeared. It is alleged that the money came from a man named Radovan Kreitzer, who gave it to his personal driver. The driver claimed under oath that, after Kreitzer gave him the money, he told him to go to Port Elizabeth and bribe the judges and lawyers who were working in Garrido's drug case. Kreitzer is currently serving a 35-year sentence at the Pretoria Central Prison for a number of charges including fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder. But this is also a story for another time. In January 2015, 4 years after his drug charges were dismissed, in Port Elizabeth, the United States started investigating Garrido and his friends, again. The states claimed that Garrido was a member of a drug syndicate that was pumping high-grade cannabis into America. The DEA started investigating Garrido after his relationship with another group of drug traffickers from the Dominican islands soured. According to court papers, Garrido had a falling out with the traffickers after he supplied them with over 5 million rands worth of illegal cannabis in August 2014, and the traffickers failed to pay him back. The investigation into this matter involved a special police agent who traveled to Johannesburg in February 2016 to meet Garrido. That agent was Joshua Baker, who met Garrido at the infamous Brazilian coffee shop in Sandton on the 11th of February 2016. This then brings us back to where our story started. Apparently, Garrido was not aware that Agent Baker was an undercover cop and working with the United States government. Garrido was also not aware that his conversation with the special agent was secretly being recorded. In these conversations, Garrido had apparently discussed among several issues the United States' attempts to catch him after he settled in South Africa. Garrido also told Agent Baker about the time he stole 100 million rands from the Colombian Cali cartel after he helped negotiate the purchase of a Russian military submarine, which was going to be used to smuggle cocaine into America. Garrido would also brag about how after arriving in Miami in 1982, he bought a gun and robbed people immediately. During the conversation, he had apparently referred to Colin Powell, a former United States Secretary of State, saying that Powell came to South Africa in 2001 to look for him. He further claimed that the United States spent over 120 million rands to try and bring him back. It would however be this specific marijuana investigation that the law finally started catching up to Garrido. Because on the 11th of October 2017, he was indicted in Miami on charges relating to marijuana dealing. That same month, Italian authorities, acting on an American-issued international arrest warrant, arrested Garrido at the Fiumicino International Airport in Rome, Italy. It was not clear when he left South Africa and made his way there. It was also not clear why United States authorities did not arrest Garrido while he was in South Africa and instead seemed to wait for him to be in another country. 2 years later, in 2019, Garrido was extradited to America. The following year, in 2020, he entered a plea agreement in the States, admitting guilt on the marijuana-related charge. Based on the agreement he entered with the United States in August 2020, Garrido pleaded guilty to conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute 100 kilograms or more of a substance containing a detectable amount of marijuana. He did not plead guilty to a firearm-related charge. The minimum jail term for the marijuana-related charge was 5 years, while the longest imprisonment was 4 decades. In having pleaded guilty to the one matter, the United States effectively agreed not to charge him with any other offenses they knew about at the time he signed the plea deal. In December 2020, he was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. However, he only served 14 months in jail, despite the extreme accusations made against him. On the 12th of February 2024, the United States Federal Bureau of Prisons told South African media that Garrido was released from prison on the 24th of January 2022. The last prison institution to which he was located was the Federal Detention Center in Miami.